Well, we have a real treat in store this morning. I asked Charlie Allen how he wanted to be introduced, and he said, just tell everybody I'm a really old guy. But that would not do justice to the treat that's in store for you. Charlie Allen is truly an icon in the intelligence community with over 40 years of service at the CIA, and then filled a couple of roles late in his career as Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis with the Department of Homeland Security from 2007 to 2009, and prior to that, Assistant Secretary for Information Analysis and Chief of Intelligence for Homeland Security. And before that, he was the Assistant Director for Central Intelligence for Collection at the CIA from 98 to 2005. But over the period of his career at the CIA, I just want to give you a few of his roles so you get a sense for the range of what he did. He was CIA's National Intelligence Officer for Warning. He was Director of the National Warning Staff, National Intelligence Officer for Counterterrorism, and Deputy Chief for Intelligence of CIA's Counterterrorism Center. He also directed the DCI Hostage Location Task Force, which focused on locating American hostages held by Hezbollah in Lebanon. So you can see that Charlie operated at the highest levels of the government, truly helped develop what is at the CIA today. And we hold him in such esteem at AFCEA that he's not only the recipient of our top intelligence award, we actually renamed our top intelligence award. It's now the Charlie Allen Award for exceptional service to the intelligence community. So without further ado, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Kent. Very generous introduction. Absolutely too generous. I did have some great assignments. One, of course, was being close to George Tenet during some difficult years for almost 7 years as his assistant director. And then I had the honor of serving Secretary Chertoff for just a little over 3 years as his chief intelligence officer at Homeland Security. My focus on terrorism has been very intent over many years, although I've worked a lot of the other global issues for a variety of directors of Central Intelligence and DNIs. I wanted to talk this morning a little bit about the terrorist threats to the homeland in the second decade of the 21st century. I always believe that the first decade of the 21st century was truly dominated by terrorism and our response against it. Brian Michael Jenkins, who served me when I was at CIA for 4 years as an advisor, talks about bookends that started the first decade. Ahmad Rassem was an Algerian trained in Afghanistan who was crossing from Canada into the United States. He was caught by a very alert U.S. Customs agent. He was, as you recall, planned to bomb the Los Angeles International Airport, LAX. 10 years later, we found an individual, a Nigerian named Umar Farouk Abdul-Muttalib, who was inspired by al-Qaeda exhortations. He also had close associations with a whole group of extremists in the United Kingdom. And he tried to bring down the airliner over Detroit on Christmas Day, 2009. I think we all recall that. So we had sort of a beginning bookend and a closing bookend for the first decade. For the second decade, well, we have that as well. On the 2nd of May of last year, we took down Osama bin Laden in Abbottabad, a place that we really didn't look at when I was looking for Osama bin Laden. I spent a lot of time with a lot of people working that. But what we had in that first decade was a metastasized global jihad. It's amazing how quickly it expanded. But it reached its high water mark, I think, about 2006, 2007. We had a lot of activity, and we had an external chief named Abu Ubaida al-Masri, an Egyptian, who was running external operations, and he began to train dozens of North Americans and Europeans in the federal administered tribal areas of Pakistan in terrorist techniques, and their idea was that they would return to their own country and then commit violence there. Very good strategy. This was really things moving toward another 9/11 back in the spring and the summer of 2006. It was a liquid bomb plot, you may recall it. British Security Service officials, British intelligence, with strong support after they told us exactly what was occurring from the United States, we crushed that plot. The idea was to bring down a number of American airliners over the Atlantic. And actually, we know that plot could have worked. The liquid bomb could have gone off, and we could have lost thousands of people. That really accelerated our determination to dismantle and destroy the al-Qaeda leadership. And since 2008, in July, the al-Qaeda leadership has been pummeled very heavily. One of the really changing points was on 28 July 2008 when Abu Khabab al-Masri, who was al-Qaeda's top bomb maker and the guy who had been designated by Zawahiri to find ways to strike at the West through non-conventional weapons, was suddenly died. We also saw Sheikh Saeed, al-Qaeda's general manager, the number 3 guy. He died in May of 2010. And then we had this number 2 guy who's moved up to succeed Zawahiri as the number 2 guy after bin Laden's death. That was Atiya Abdul Rahman. And he didn't live long. He died somehow in August 2011. Well, where are we today? Well, we have a dangerous organization, but it's not cohesive. It's hollowed out. Its leaders are hard to replace. I used to read from pundits and others that there was always someone to step in and take over, but they have to have experienced leaders. It's not hard. It's very hard to replace the experienced leaders, and they can't do it today. To a large degree, al-Qaeda in the federal administered area is al-Qaeda Central, as we call it, is paralyzed, just trying to survive, I think. And it's unlikely that Zawahiri, who is a rather dour and non-charismatic, not well-liked guy, can resuscitate the organization where it was. You know, there's National Counterterrorism Center a year or so ago said there are only about 300 al-Qaeda members left in the Fatah, and maybe only 100 operated inside Afghanistan. So we really have taken this war to the central leadership, very much damaged. We do have al-Qaeda-linked networks in Pakistan. We have the Tehrik-i-Taliban, which is led by Hakimullah Maqsood. Now, that group, the TTP, trains operatives for attacks into Afghanistan. Forces in ISAF forces in Afghanistan have killed a great number of these TTP guys. We also had it here. We had Faisal Shahzad on 1 May 2010 up in Times Square. He was trained for 6 weeks, but he wasn't really taught how to make a bomb. Couldn't even start a fire. But my view is that the TTP is still regionally based, tribally based, and really not committed to a global jihad. And you've heard a lot about the Haqqani Network. The Haqqani Network is led by Siraj Haqqani. This is a Pashtun tribal group. It's known very well by the intelligence community. It provides a lot of manpower for cross-border operations into Afghanistan, and it grooms al-Qaeda operatives for suicide operations. Many of these operatives have been killed by ISAF inside Afghanistan, and some of the Haqqani leaders seem to have died over in Waziristan. There was the number 3 guy seemed to have died, Jan Baz Zadran, in October this year. Just happened to die one day. And that, to a large degree, was a good thing, because we think Jan Baz Zadran planned the attack on the U.S. Embassy back in September. So a month later, suddenly he just up and dies. So we know that the Haqqani network is dangerous, and it'll continue to train and direct operatives probably to attack here. But it also is regionally and tribally oriented. There's one other group that we have to worry about over in the northwest province of Pakistan. That's the Lashkar-e-Taiba. It's a Sunni-based group. Kashmiri group is focused on Jammu and Kashmir. It's led attacks into India. It attacked the Indian Parliament in 2001. It led this devastating attack on Mumbai, 26 to 30 November 2008. I worked that for Secretary Chertoff. He was incredibly interested in keeping up to date almost minute to minute. LET is also a dangerous group. Also, we worry about its interest in WMD, but we think it remains still largely focused on India, not the United States. We've had great success in dismantling other groups, particularly in Southeast Asia, the Jamaat Islamiyah, which led the attack in Bali on 12 October 2002. 88 Australians were killed in that attack. Hundreds were killed, hundreds were injured in that. That's been largely dismantled by Indonesian counterterrorism forces. They've been supported a lot by the United States and others. All the top leaders are killed or in prison. And also we had the Abu Sayyaf group, which was a Filipino group, which actually ended up in one American hostage being killed. That's been pretty much shut down, again, by the Filipino Army, and the United States has been very helpful in doing that. AQI in Iraq remains disrupted as a consequence of our surge and really a multidimensional attack on AQI, which is al-Qaeda in Iraq. I think we have to be concerned about whether it will revive. We've seen some recent signs of increased bombings in and around Baghdad, and AQI seems to be reinventing itself. But it's still focused on Iraq. It's not focused on our homeland. There are some dangerous groups, other groups that exist right now that we have to worry about. AQIM, which is the al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. This is an umbrella organization that operates in Mali and Algeria. It seems to be focused on attacking the apostate governments there, not even attacking on the continent of Western Europe as yet, even though there are cells and sympathizers in Western Europe. And it has not set its sights on attacking the United States. But it does do damage. You remember the attack back on 30 April of last year, 2011, when it attacked a cafe frequented by Westerners in Marrakesh, Morocco, where 15 persons were killed and dozens wounded. Probably the most dangerous group still remains al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We're all rather familiar with that. They control a lot of the wild areas of the southern governance of Yemen. We are familiar with it mostly because Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born Yemeni cleric who became a very senior operational planner and a propagandist for AQAP. He had with him a guy named Samir Khan, who came from Charlotte, North Carolina, who was his writer for his electronic journal called Inspire. We published about 8 of those Inspire documents, and I hope you've read them because they're interesting. How to make a bomb in your mother's kitchen, things of that nature. They were also involved in the Hewlett-Packard toner cartridge explosive bombs that were undetected. They actually a couple of them flew on airliners, but thanks to Saudi intelligence, we were able to stop that. But again, those were nitrate, PETN, very hard to find. And it was only thwarted because of a highly accurate intelligence. But what we see was the death of Anwar al-Awlaki, and he died on 30 September last year, along with Samir Khan. So 2 for the price of 1. In any event, I think al-Awlaki was sui generis. He was a Westerner. He used hip-hop music. And it wasn't just Americans, you people in the United States, the Canadians. My visits up to Canada told me that Canadian youths were inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki. So right now it seems to be there are a lot of hardened fighters fighting for AQAP in Yemen, but they don't look to the United States. So it looks rather different. So where are we today? Al-Qaeda has not conducted a successful attack on the United States since 9/11, successful attack. In addition to the aviation plot of 2006, which was a brilliant operation, I had the pleasure of working with a lot of people and Secretary Chertoff during that. There was an effort by Najibullah Zazi, who was arrested in September '09. He flew beneath our radars. We didn't know about him until the last moment. He was going to do mass transportation bombings up in New York City. He worked out in Denver, Colorado. Very close. Could have happened. Now, of course, we had Umar Farouk Abdul Muttalib with the airliner, and we had the HP, the Hewitt-Packard toner cartridges. We could have had other disasters against our homeland. It's my view that we cannot declare victory. You keep reading about the defeat of al-Qaeda in the press and by journalists who should know better, or even people who speak publicly. I think its capabilities to conduct any large-scale attack is seriously reduced, but you saw what happened in 26/30 November 2008 in Mumbai. 10 highly trained people held that city paralyzed and India paralyzed as the world watched for 4 days. Al-Qaeda is more decentralized, more dependent on its affiliates, but its ability to radicalize and recruit distant followers to carry out attacks here remains strong because it uses the internet to fuel this. A lot of people and affiliates have bought the central inspiring message of Al-Qaeda, the ideological view of that the West is at war with Islam, the West is evil, the West are infidels, even though most of the people killed over the years since the base, Al-Qaeda was formed in the early 90s, most of the people killed have been actually fellow Muslims. So its communications network, which is, of course, the internet, functions, and Al-Qaeda and some of the affiliates remain resilient and opportunistic. One of the things I think we have to think about is that Al-Qaeda really doesn't come here and pinpoint this person or that person, brings them off to be trained, whether it's in Yemen or in New York or in the federal administered tribal area. Most of the people that we've had, the dozens and dozens of Americans, West Europeans, but particularly Americans that have gone out to the federal administered tribal area, they found their own way there. Then they're vetted and checked and stressed to see if they're spies being inserted by the West. If they think they're okay, then they start training them. So a lot of it has been very voluntary. And we really have to think about this and think about it, the opportunistic aspects of Al-Qaeda and how it operates, taking advantage of Westerners, particularly young men whose minds have been sort of bent by what they read on the internet. But fundamentally, what we see here in the United States is that out of 3 million Muslims, only a very tiny number of people have been involved in terrorism. I think we have to keep this clearly in mind, that it is not a flood at all, extremely small. I always cite the Pew Research study of 22 May 2007. Most Muslims in this country are well-adjusted, mainstream, middle class or upper middle class. I've met a lot of them. It's one of the things Secretary Chertoff made sure I did, to speak with them. Well-spoken, very bright people, very successful, doctors, lawyers, you name it, businessmen. They're there, and they're doing a job. I do have some concerns about some of our immigrants who's arrived in the last 15 to 20 years as refugees and asylum seekers. Some are strongly attracted to anti-Western extremist movements in their countries of origin, in the most obvious case is Somalia, where we've had problems with young Somali first-generation naturalized Americans, in particular, going to fight for al-Shabaab over East Africa. And we have a second-generation natural-born Americans who are going, some of whom have gone as well. But when you look at a RAND study that Brian Jenkins did and was published in 2010, only 176 persons were arrested in the United States for providing material support to jihadist groups, either attempting to join jihadist fronts abroad or attempting terrorist attacks in the United States. That's very small, very small. We only have had, between 2001 and 2010, there are only 82 cases of what might be defined as homegrown extremism has been brought to our courts. There has been an increase. There were 35 cases in 2009 and 2010, which was a sharp increase from about four incidents a year between 2002 and 2008. But even so, it is still only a handful of people. A small number of those had operational plans, and most of them were half-baked. They're really rudimentary. So America's jihadists have not proved to be very competent. They're dedicated in some cases, but not at all competent. But even on a small scale, it's a reality for which there is no end point. So we should expect continuing attacks from within, and some especially on our critical infrastructure, like mass transportation, which could create mass casualties. The Zazi case is the one that comes to mind most painfully. And you know that the idea is to create large human casualties, damage or destroy critical infrastructures of the United States, such as our mass transportation, and above all, affect the national psyche of the United States. Put doubts in our minds about our resiliency. I think that's, and I see a lot of attention these days, AFCEA and others looking at the whole issue of resiliency. If we're not resilient, then we will not win this. And there's no end to this. World War I, the Great War, the war to end all wars, 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month. There was an end. There was VE Day in Europe in May of 1945. There's VJ Day in Asia against the Japanese. We had an end to the war. Well, we're not going to have an end to this war. It's going to go on. These guys are going to get better in the cyber world. They're going to be able to, they're not there now to attack critical infrastructure, but it doesn't take a lot of knowledge to get there. But overall, as a nation, we're immensely safer from terrorist attacks as a consequence of our strenuous efforts. U.S. intelligence community, in conjunction with U.S. military, our special forces in particular, have been on the offensive unilaterally, bilaterally, multilaterally over the last 10 years. And we've dismantled and destroyed Al-Qaeda Central and a number of its affiliated networks. I'm very proud to have been part of the Homeland Security and the efforts that it conducted to bring together intelligence and law enforcement. And I think we've transformed the way we do business in this country. The bright line between foreign and domestic that was drawn back in the 1970s because of alleged abuses by the intelligence community and law enforcement is gone. It's faintly there, but it's gone. It also, we have something called the National Counterterrorism Center, where everything comes together, both foreign and domestic, so that we can do the right assessments. And let me say, NCTC under Mike Leiter matured very significantly. It is today a center of gravity for counterterrorism intelligence, and it's deeply respected by the administration and by the Congress. CIA and the FBI have transformed their relationships. And with the formation of DHS under Governor Ridge, Secretary Chertoff, and now under Secretary Napolitano, we really do have a different way of operating, and bringing information and intelligence now down to state and local governments It's got to get better, got to be more quality to it. It's got to be so the flow down has expanded tremendously. I did a lot of that. Karen Wagner, my successors, worked on it as well. But there's got to be a flow upward from the state fusion centers, 73 of them or more or less, and from the police departments. Relationships with the FBI have improved, I think, tremendously with the formation of the National Security Branch. The FBI is not just an investigative agency, it's also one that recognizes the power and importance of intelligence. Yeah, there's still some edges between DHS and I think DOJ and the Bureau, but I think those have to be worked out, and I do believe that under the Director of National Intelligence, there will be a lot of improvements even this year to further unify the critical role of DHS intelligence and DHS information sharing, DHS border intelligence, which is not all in the Bureau's lane. No one's ever going to interfere with the Bureau and its investigative work and its intelligence predicate to open cases. No one. But there has to be this rich relationship, I think, developed and nurtured. I know Karen Wagner, my good friend, is working to do that. So that's where we are today. A hollowed out al-Qaeda, still dangerous and opportunistic, and there's no end. There's no bookend that says this is the end of the war on terror. It's never going to happen. We've got to be strong and resilient. I always cite the British. When 7705, when the tube was attacked, when the bus top was torn off, the British stopped the tube where the attacks occurred. The tube flowed elsewhere in the city. The trains, if you've ever seen the trains coming out of London, bringing hundreds of thousands of people, didn't stop. Not one train was stopped. Except for the bus that was torn up, all the buses continued to run. Heathrow and Gatwick remained open. No flights were canceled. They didn't shut down any airports. Well, they have a lot of resilience. And I believe as Americans, we've got to have the same type of toughness, mental toughness, and I don't think we are quite there yet, and I think we have to get there, because we will be attacked again. We don't know when. We've dismantled, thwarted dozens of attacks. Globally, al-Qaeda is on the back foot, but rest assured, from within or from without, inbound, there'll be another attack. But above all, we have to be a country that has far more resilience and far more mental strength than we've shown to date. That's my sermon. I can speak a little more candidly now I'm not in government. Any questions? Yes, sir. Yes.
But also the Somalia al-Qaeda declared that in public and so forth. Okay, sorry about that. So I just want to get your thoughts on Hezbollah, Hamas, but also al-Qaeda in Somalia.
Yeah.
Declares that, and does that give the U.S. some breathing room to go in there harder?
Well, I think, let me take the last one before we get to Hezbollah and Hamas. We have gone in there hard into East Africa selectively. Our special forces, our Air Force and military have done good works along with intelligence support. A number of leadership of al-Shabaab have been taken down. Yeah, I know that they announced they have a new merger between al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Somalia, and that Zawahiri has blessed this. It doesn't change things very much. I don't think it's going to make it any stronger. What we have to do is have what we see occurring in Minneapolis, St. Paul's, where the local communities are returning in those problem people, those people who are getting radicalized. This is a real great change. I think it's brought on by the fact that the parents of young men, particularly young Muslim men or converts to Islam, they don't want their sons going off to fight in this. So I'm not, I think, We have to be careful about Al-Shabaab. They have a great charismatic guy from, where is he from? Alabama, Mobile, Alabama, American, Hamamabi, who is the leader, one of the fighters there. Now, when it comes to Hezbollah, I spent a lot of my life working Hezbollah. Hezbollah is what we call Team A. It is the A team. It knows how to operate. It is not totally subservient to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, or Al-Quds, which is their expeditionary force of Iran, but it's very dependent on it for arms, training, support, money, monetary. Nasrallah, who's the Secretary General of Hezbollah, he sees a lot of advantage. He wants political advantage in Lebanon, where he's gained it, where it's not only a terrorist organization, it's a political organization, economic organization, social organization, and a master group of committing terror. They're very good. You know, in 92 and 94, they blew away first the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires, then they blew away the home for the aged, killed a lot of Jewish people who are aged. Makes me a little angry these days, given what Kent said about my age. So this is a dangerous group, and an event in the Strait of Hormuz, or an event that would trigger some conflict in the Strait of Hormuz, and if there were conflict involving the United States or the West and Iran, even a limited conflict, we would have to be very wary of this, because they can insert operatives very surreptitiously into this country and conduct attacks. They are the A team. Hamas, as you know, made up, there's a sort of a tentative agreement with the West Bank, but it still remains very seriously a terrorist group, and very seriously wants the annihilation of Israel, and remains very much on the hit list as a terrorist, listed as a terrorist group by Secretary Clinton, and that's where it's going to remain. It's got to prove that it really is going to change its ways, and I have no optimism that Hamas is going to change that much anytime soon. Any other questions?
Hi, I had a question over here. Over here. My question was, I totally agree with your last comment, which is the fact that we need to get, I think, a little more sturdy when these kind of things happen. Not that they're not horrific, but I think, too, a lot of times the political atmosphere can kind of whip people up. So what kind of things do you suggest that Americans do so that when we face this kind of adversity, which we will obviously again at some point in our future, what kind of things can we do as a country to better prepare ourselves and respond better as people?
I think we're moving in that direction, but not fast enough. I think the government, associations like AFCEA and other enlightened groups are talking about this. Foreign policy, a lot of journalists and academicians, but it needs to get down to the very local level. We've got to be tough, because we are going to be struck again. And right now, I remember President Obama talked about, he made this one foray where he said, you know, we could be attacked, we can absorb another attack, which is true. But he got pummeled politically for that, and I don't care whether it's a Republican, Democratic president. They have to lead, the White House has to lead, and we have to lead at state and local governments. Our governors should be concerned about this, our Sheriff's Association, our chiefs of police in major cities. This should be one of their themes. This should be one of their themes, resilience. The British talk about it all the time. They run conferences. I went to a conference at Ditchley. It was a brilliant conference on resiliency. And they had example after example that you can do this. I think we've got to do a lot better in talking bluntly and candidly to the American public and say, you know, we're a $14 trillion economy. We have a military force second to none. It'll be second to none for this century. We're strong. We're tough. And we can take the best blows of our terrorist adversaries and go on and destroy them. But we don't do that, and we don't talk enough about it. And perhaps when this polarizing campaign, presidential campaign, is over and a president is elected, but I think that should be a high priority for any administration. a re-elected President Obama or a new president. We have to be resilient as a society. We have to be a lot tougher. We aren't there.
We've got some questions coming electronically too. Under Secretary Allen, question here is, what about the threat associated with so-called homegrown terrorism? Can you comment on that, the Timothy McVeighs, the extremist groups? Do you see that threat growing, sustaining, or is there anything?
Yeah, I think there's been an uptick in right-wing extremism in this country. It's not manifested itself in the McVeigh version, thank God, but we see in our polarizing political debates on the far fringes, we see worries, and it's the responsibility of the FBI and the responsibility of particularly the Department of Homeland Security Intelligence to assess this. The FBI has to investigate it. I think there is an uptick. What happened in Norway back in July of 2011 was grievous. One man who knew how to make a fertilizer bomb, and a massive one, blew up the central government building there. I've been in that building when I was in CIA. It's hard to believe that whole city block was essentially destroyed. Went out and he killed, I don't know, 73 people in this island, mostly young people. One person traumatized and damaged the psyche of the Norwegian people, who are very tough people, very tough, very strong people. Resisted Soviet efforts and encroachments. I know the Norwegians, I like them. They have resiliency. But even so, that was a devastating blow to the Norwegian government and to the people. So, from my perspective, homegrown terrorism, I talked about the fact there have been people radicalized who are Al-Qaeda ideology, who are fairly incompetent, rudimentary, many caught in stings very naively. Thank God for that. But I do believe we have to look across at other extremist elements in the country, and I think we're doing it. It's just, and the Timothy McVeigh, the Moore building being destroyed, it was unbelievable what McVeigh did. Disgruntled people. That's where all our spies came from. Rick Ames, disgruntled because he wasn't promoted and needed money. Bob Hansen, disgruntled because his brilliance wasn't recognized at the FBI. Disgruntled. Both turned great traitors and did great damage to the national security of the United States. So there are disgruntled people that where law enforcement plays such a crucial role, and Homeland Security has such a strong role.
Okay, and one last one we have time for here that came in. Would you comment, please, on your views of near and long-term relations between the U.S. and Pakistan, in particular with sharing of intelligence related to terrorism?
Well, that's a complicated question, and there's probably limits to what I can say in this forum. But the relationship has been there for many decades. The relationship has been strained deeply. The fact that Osama bin Laden lived 5 years or so in Abbottabad is hard to believe that he did not have external support or retired support, particularly from military or intelligence elements of the Pakistani government. Secretary Clinton even said something almost to that effect. It's a relationship that we have to maintain. We have to, seems to me, funnel our money more into projects that help the infrastructure, that help develop Pakistan rather onto the military and security side, because they have to show that they're better and more responsible partners, in my view. I think it can be done. We cannot cut off all assistance to Pakistan. Pakistan is a very interesting country, and you must always remember one thing. It has nuclear weapons. We saw them first do testing back in 1991. We knew it was coming. We made some bad decisions then, which I think hurt us because we cut off, we didn't permit Pakistani officers to come for years and years to U.S. schools, service schools. Terrible mistake. The legislation passed by the Congress was just opposite of what it should have done. Right now, that we have a very substantial nuclear stockpile. sitting under Pakistani military control. And the military there are very good. I know Pakistani officers. But it doesn't mean if there's some difficulties in the governments and governance that we could not have a real acute problems on our hands, and we have to continue to engage President Zardari and Prime Minister Gilani, and we have to involve the Chief of Staff of the Army, Kayani. We just have to do that. And what this administration is doing, what the previous administration is doing, must continue in the new administration. Thank you.